to the House.
I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Mr Speaker, I'll be taking only a very brief call on this amendment bill on behalf of New Zealand First. I note that the restrictions on the awarding of compensation expire on the 1st of July 2012 and that this bill simply defers that expiry date to the 30th of June 2013. To that extent, New Zealand First will have no objection to the passage of this bill and will support it proceeding. Indeed, as Leanne Dalziel said, we really have very little choice about the matter at this stage in the circumstances. So New Zealand First will await with interest the substantive legislation to be brought forward by the government, which it says will make the existing victims' claims process permanent. Of course, the devil will be in the detail, and we will look at the substantive legislation in detail when it comes through. I do wonder why, as a new member, there has been such a significant delay by the government in carrying out this review. Is it because they're not really so interested in it, or it is just a low priority for them? However, I've listened to these speeches by the government members, which indicates the opposite, and I hope that is the case. New Zealand First will be happy to await the review and the new legislation and to debate it then as though it was a completely new proposal, because we will not be affected by the legislation which will expire and by all the arguments which were made for and against that legislation. Consequently, New Zealand First reserves its position on the substantive bill when it comes through, and we will be happy to consider the government's position. New Zealand First is not soft on crime, and we will make sure that that is the case in the way that we look at this legislation. At the same time, I personally have some sympathy for the Green position, and I too would like to investigate the possible alternatives to imprisonment for some of the people, but not the more serious criminals that we have in prison at the present time. I do think that in the 21st century we ought to have a greater menu of sentences for people who commit crime, and hopefully much more oriented towards rehabilitation and the avoidance of more crime in the future. And like the Green Party, New Zealand First will not be supporting any grandstanding on this issue, and hope that we will not get charges of who is soft or who is strong on crime. That kind of mindless nonsense needs to be left in the past. As I said, this is the 21st century, and being soft or strong on crime is not the issue. The issue is reducing crime, and doing that requires an approach much more advanced and much more sophisticated than just throwing more and more people in prison and making provisions that are inappropriate. So New Zealand First will want to make sure that this substantive legislation, when it comes through, is appropriate in restricting claims by prisoners, because there is a case for restricting that. On the other hand, prisoners can also be victims, and their rights must also be protected. So there is a balance to be had there, and that is, I think, where the debate should be centred, and that's the way New Zealand First will be looking at it. And what I don't want to hear is what I've just heard from the opposition benches, which is some mindless, idiotic comment which will make no positive contribution to the debate whatsoever. So we will listen to good arguments, and not those from the government, then from those people who are putting that sort of idea forward. Isn't going to sway us, and I suggest will not sway the members of the public either. So we'll be taking an objective approach to this. We'll listen to both sides, and we'll look for that balance I spoke of in the substantial legislation. For the time being, we will support this bill, simply deferring the date to 2013.
Dr. Jackie Blue.
Mr Speaker, I'm very pleased to